The second you began watching this, contact with a higher vibrational timeline initiated. Not as an idea. Not as a future possibility. As a present moment coherence shift. This matters, because contact is not something that happens to you later when you are ready. Readiness is what caused this moment to occur. The field does not wait for permission in words. It responds to state. And your state crossed a threshold. Contact, in this context, is not dramatic. It is subtle, stabilizing, and already underway. A higher timeline does not announce itself. It does not arrive with force. It becomes available when your internal frequency reaches compatibility. The moment you clicked play, a resonance match was acknowledged. This is not coincidence. This is not chance. This is alignment recognizing itself. A higher vibrational timeline is not somewhere else. It is not above you or ahead of you. It exists in parallel, accessible only through identity coherence. When your emotional baseline, nervous system, and perception soften into alignment, that timeline begins to take precedence. Not instantly. Not explosively. But steadily. This is the contact phase. And it begins with stabilization, not revelation. Stabilization means your system is learning to hold a different baseline without rejecting it. The higher timeline does not override you. It does not replace your life overnight. It gently reorganizes what feels natural, what feels heavy, what feels unnecessary. You may notice subtle shifts in attention, in patience, in what no longer creates charge. These are not losses. They are recalibrations. Nothing is being added to you. Nothing is being downloaded. There is only a reordering of what already exists. The higher timeline was always available. What changed was your capacity to sustain it. Contact occurs the moment that capacity reaches sufficiency. This is why effort is not the trigger. Recognition is. If your mind is searching for proof, that is normal. The old timeline survives through verification and control. The higher timeline stabilizes through allowing. The more you try to define this moment, the more you return to the lower frequency. The invitation here is to notice, not analyze. To allow, not grip. Stabilization happens when you stop trying to make it happen. You are not behind. You did not miss anything. You did not need to prepare more. This moment is evidence of readiness, not lack. The field mirrors internal order, not ambition. And order has already been established enough for contact to begin. Let this be simple. You are not entering something new. You are letting something familiar take priority. This is why it feels quiet instead of overwhelming. This is why it feels grounding instead of dramatic. This is the signature of a higher timeline locking in. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Contact is often misunderstood because the mind looks for communication. It expects messages, symbols, confirmations, or signs. That expectation alone destabilizes the very process it is trying to observe. A higher vibrational timeline does not communicate with you. It does not send signals. It does not speak. It aligns. Contact is resonance. It is the moment your internal state becomes compatible with a different version of reality that already exists. Nothing is transmitted. Nothing is received. There is only a shift in which timeline has priority access to your perception and experience. When this is misunderstood, the mind waits for something to happen and misses what already has. Communication implies separation. It assumes there is something over there and you are over here. A higher timeline does not operate through that structure. It is not other. It is not external. It is a parallel configuration of reality that becomes available only through identity coherence. When coherence is present, contact is automatic. When it is not, no amount of attention can force it. Expectation is the most common destabilizer. When you expect signs, you are signaling that you believe contact is outside of you. That belief collapses resonance. The higher timeline requires neutrality, not anticipation. Calm recognition, not alert waiting. The moment you lean forward, you return to effort. And effort belongs to lower density timelines. This is why many people feel something begin and then lose it. They label it. They look for confirmation. They try to understand it too quickly. Understanding is not the entry point. Stabilization is. A higher timeline must first become familiar to your nervous system before it becomes obvious to your mind. When expectation rushes ahead, the system retracts. Identity-level mechanics operate differently. Your identity is not who you think you are. It is the emotional and perceptual baseline you occupy most naturally. That baseline determines which timeline feels real. When your identity softens into calm, neutrality, and presence, the higher timeline finds a compatible interface. Contact occurs not because you noticed it, but because you stopped interfering with it. There is nothing mystical required here. No special sensitivity. No decoding. The higher timeline does not reward attention. It responds to coherence. When your inner state becomes orderly enough, reality reorganizes to match it. That reorganization is contact. Subtle at first. Almost unremarkable. But persistent. If you are waiting for proof, you are still oriented toward communication. Proof belongs to the old timeline. The higher timeline does not prove itself. It becomes obvious over time as what no longer fits begins to fall away. Less friction. Less urgency. Less compulsion to seek. These are not signs. They are structural changes. This reframing is important because it removes pressure. You do not have to watch closely. You do not have to interpret. You do not have to hold on to anything. Contact is not fragile. It is self-stabilizing when left alone. The less you demand from it, the more dominant it becomes. You are not meant to receive something. You are meant to become compatible. When that compatibility is present, the higher timeline does not need to announce itself. It simply starts to feel like home. Clarity is not the beginning of a timeline shift. It is the byproduct of stabilization. This is where many people misunderstand the process and assume something has gone wrong. They feel disoriented, uncertain, or mentally foggy and conclude they are regressing. In reality, this phase is evidence that a higher vibrational timeline is beginning to take priority while the old one has not yet fully released. When two timelines overlap, clarity is temporarily suspended. The mind is calibrated to the old structure, while the body and emotional field begin adapting to the new one. During this window, insight does not arrive cleanly because the system is rebalancing. Expecting immediate understanding at this stage is like expecting silence while tuning a signal. The noise is not failure. It is adjustment. A higher timeline carries a different rhythm. It moves with less urgency, less internal dialogue, and less need to define itself. The nervous system must first learn that this slower, quieter frequency is safe. Until that happens, the mind tries to reassert control by asking questions. Why is this happening? What does this mean? What should I do next? Those questions belong to the old timeline, which survives through analysis and prediction. Stabilization comes first because the body is the gatekeeper. If the nervous system does not feel safe, the higher timeline cannot anchor. This has nothing to do with fear in the obvious sense. It is about familiarity. The old timeline may be uncomfortable, but it is known. The higher timeline may be expansive, but it is unfamiliar. The system must recalibrate its baseline before clarity can emerge. This is why confusion is not a sign to stop. It is a sign to slow down. When clarity is forced, stabilization collapses. When stabilization is allowed, clarity arrives on its own. Not as a revelation, but as a quiet knowing that does not require explanation. You will not feel the need to convince yourself. You will simply notice that certain questions no longer feel relevant. The overlap phase can feel like standing between worlds. Old habits still appear, but with less charge. New impulses arise, but without clear direction. This in-between state is not meant to be resolved mentally. It is meant to be lived through gently. The higher timeline stabilizes through presence, not comprehension. As stabilization deepens, the mind begins to reorganize around the new baseline. Thoughts slow. Attention narrows. Decisions feel simpler. Not because you figured something out, but because fewer options resonate. This is clarity emerging naturally, without effort. It is not sharp or dramatic. It is calm and obvious. Trying to rush this phase creates resistance. The moment you demand clarity, you signal that you do not trust the process unfolding. Trust is not belief. It is non-interference. It is allowing the system to find its new equilibrium without being interrogated. If you are experiencing uncertainty right now, it does not mean you are lost. It means two timelines are disentangling. One is losing dominance. The other is stabilizing. Clarity will follow, but only after the higher timeline feels natural enough to be lived, not analyzed. Understanding is not the entry point. Compatibility is. Once compatibility is established, understanding becomes unnecessary. The higher timeline does not explain itself. It simply starts to make sense because it feels like home. Once contact with a higher vibrational timeline begins, something subtle but decisive shifts in how reality responds. Not because you asked for it. Not because you wanted it badly enough. But because coherence has changed. From this point forward, reality no longer waits for effort. It reorganizes automatically around the internal order you are now sustaining. This is not a reward system. It is a mirror. Reality does not respond to desire. Desire is a signal of absence. It declares that what you want is not here. That declaration stabilizes the old timeline, not the new one. A higher timeline does not assemble around longing. It assembles around coherence. When your internal state becomes ordered enough, reality has no choice but to reflect that order back to you. This is where many people misinterpret what is happening. They notice changes and assume they manifested them through intention. They believe they finally asked the right way or focused hard enough. In truth, nothing responded to their desire. Reality responded to their alignment. Desire may have been present earlier, but desire did not cause the shift. Coherence did. Timeline coherence means your emotional baseline, nervous system, and perception are no longer contradicting each other. There is less internal noise. Less urgency. Less resistance to the present moment. When this happens, reality reorganizes without instruction. Opportunities, conversations, and circumstances begin rearranging themselves, not to please you, but to match you. This mirror effect is impersonal. It does not judge. It does not test. It does not reward effort. It simply reflects the dominant signal. When the signal changes, the reflection must follow. This is why forcing outcomes creates friction. Force is incoherence. It introduces tension into the signal and stabilizes denser timelines where struggle is required. A higher timeline is efficient. It does not require persuasion. It does not need management. It emerges naturally when internal resistance drops. This is why calm is more powerful than intensity, and neutrality more effective than obsession. The field responds to what is stable, not what is loud. If you find yourself watching reality shift without clear cause, this is not randomness. It is delayed reflection. The internal change happened first. The external adjustment is catching up. Trying to control this phase collapses it. Watching it with expectation distorts it. The cleanest way through is non-interference. This is also why frustration is a signal, not a problem. Frustration indicates a mismatch between the timeline you are now stabilizing and behaviors rooted in the old one. Reality is not blocking you. It is showing you where coherence has not yet fully integrated. That feedback is precise, not punitive. Nothing needs to be chased. Nothing needs to be convinced. When coherence is present, reality cooperates effortlessly. When it is not, no amount of desire can compensate. This is the law operating beneath all experience. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. As this becomes clear, something important settles. You stop trying to get reality to move. You allow it to respond. And in that allowing, the higher timeline gains momentum without resistance. This is how reorganization happens. Quietly. Automatically. Without negotiation. Emotion is not a reaction to reality. It is the tuning mechanism that determines which version of reality you have access to. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of timeline selection, because emotion has been framed as something to control, suppress, or transcend. In truth, emotion is informational. It is the feedback system that tells you which timeline you are currently stabilizing. A higher vibrational timeline is not accessed through positive thinking or emotional performance. It is accessed through compatibility. Expansion is not a reward. Contraction is not a punishment. Expansion simply indicates resonance with the higher timeline. Contraction indicates residual attachment to the old one. Neither is wrong. Both are instructions. When you feel expansion, ease, openness, or quiet clarity, your system is signaling that it is compatible with the higher timeline's frequency. When you feel contraction, heaviness, agitation, or urgency, your system is signaling that part of your identity is still oriented toward a denser timeline. This information is precise. It does not need interpretation. It needs acknowledgement. Moral judgment is what distorts this process. When contraction is labeled as failure, the system tightens. When expansion is chased, it becomes unstable. The higher timeline does not respond to emotional management. It responds to emotional honesty. The moment you allow emotion to be what it is, without assigning meaning, it begins doing its job correctly. Emotion becomes unreliable only when it is resisted. Resistance introduces noise. Suppression creates delay. Indulgence creates fixation. But neutral awareness allows emotion to function as a clean signal. This is why trying to stay high frequency backfires. It turns emotion into a performance instead of a guide. The higher timeline does not require constant expansion. It requires coherence. Coherence includes moments of contraction that are seen clearly and allowed to pass. When contraction is allowed without judgment, it releases quickly. When it is fought, it lingers. The difference is not effort. It is permission. This reframing is critical because it removes pressure. You are not required to feel a certain way to access a higher timeline. You are required to listen accurately. Emotion is the interface. It shows you, moment by moment, where your identity is still entangled with the old timeline and where it has already shifted. As stabilization progresses, emotional swings soften. Not because emotion disappears, but because the signal becomes clearer. You stop reacting to emotion and start orienting by it. This is subtle. It does not feel like control. It feels like trust. You trust the signal enough to stop arguing with it. When expansion is present, you do not need to cling to it. When contraction appears, you do not need to fix it. Both states are transient. What matters is which one you identify with. Identification locks timelines. Observation releases them. The higher timeline becomes dominant not when emotion is elevated, but when emotion is allowed to move without interference. This is why emotional neutrality is so powerful. It does not suppress. It permits. And in that permission, the tuning mechanism does its work automatically. Emotion is not telling you what to do. It is telling you where you are. When you stop asking it to be different, it guides you exactly where you need to go. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a structural state that determines which timelines can remain active around you. A higher vibrational timeline is not compatible with urgency, force, or internal pressure. Those states belong to denser realities where survival, control, and effort are required. When calm becomes your baseline, the higher timeline is not invited. It is allowed to take priority. Urgency fragments the signal. It introduces noise into the field and tells reality that something is missing or threatened. That signal stabilizes lower timelines where tension is normal and struggle is rewarded. Calm does the opposite. Calm communicates sufficiency. It tells the field that nothing needs to be corrected in this moment. That signal is structurally compatible with higher-order realities. This is why forcing never works at this level. Force assumes resistance. Resistance implies separation. Separation is the foundation of lower vibrational timelines. When you push, strive, or obsess, you reinforce the very structure you are trying to exit. The higher timeline does not respond to effort because effort is evidence of misalignment. Allowing is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not. Allowing is precision. It is the ability to remain present without injecting tension into the system. Calm does not mean disengaged. It means coherent. When your internal state is coherent, the higher timeline does not have to fight for access. It becomes the most efficient option. Notice how urgency feels in the body. Tightness. Forward leaning. Mental pressure. These sensations are not wrong, but they are incompatible with stabilization. When urgency is present, the system is broadcasting that it does not trust the present moment. The higher timeline cannot anchor where the present moment is rejected. Calm, on the other hand, signals trust without belief. You do not have to convince yourself that everything is fine. Calm simply means you are not interfering. You are not trying to outrun the moment or control the outcome. That non-interference creates space. Space is what higher timelines require to settle. This is why calm often arrives after exhaustion. When the system stops pushing, coherence returns. But you do not have to reach exhaustion to access calm. You can choose non-interference now. Not as an action, but as a release. Letting go of urgency is not doing nothing. It is removing distortion. As calm stabilizes, you may notice that things resolve without effort. Decisions simplify. Timing improves. Not because you became better at managing reality, but because reality no longer has to compensate for internal tension. The higher timeline functions through ease, not intensity. If calm feels unfamiliar, that is normal. The old timeline trained you to equate pressure with progress. The higher timeline operates on a different logic. Progress occurs when resistance drops. Movement happens when you stop trying to move. You do not need to hold calm perfectly. You only need to return to it when you notice urgency taking over. Each return strengthens compatibility. Each moment of allowing gives the higher timeline more structural support. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Calm is not something you maintain. It is something you stop disrupting. When you do, the higher timeline no longer competes. It simply takes precedence, quietly and naturally, because nothing is in its way. A higher vibrational timeline can only stabilize in the present moment. Not because the present is special in a poetic sense, but because it is the only point where identity is active. The past is memory. The future is projection. Neither can host coherence. The moment contact begins, the question is not what will happen next, but how fully you are available now. Postponement is the most subtle way the old timeline preserves itself. It disguises itself as preparation, patience, or waiting for the right conditions. But waiting implies that alignment exists somewhere else. Preparation implies that you are not yet sufficient. Both assumptions keep your identity anchored to a lower baseline where becoming is always delayed. A higher timeline does not arrive after conditions improve. Conditions improve after the higher timeline anchors. The order matters. When you postpone presence, you deny the higher timeline the only place it can stabilize. This is why nothing changes while you are getting ready. Readiness is not achieved through accumulation. It is achieved through availability. The present moment is where your emotional baseline, nervous system, and perception converge. That convergence is coherence. When you leave the present, coherence collapses into fragments. One part of you is remembering. Another is anticipating. Neither can stabilize a new reality. The higher timeline does not compete in fragments. It requires wholeness. Preparation feels responsible, but it is often avoidance. Waiting feels wise, but it is often hesitation. The old timeline survives by convincing you that now is incomplete. The higher timeline requires that now be enough. Not perfect. Enough. Enough for coherence to form. Enough for stabilization to begin. This does not mean you force yourself into presence. Forcing is another form of future orientation. Presence is not an action. It is the absence of delay. It is what remains when you stop negotiating with the moment. When you stop asking when things will change, the higher timeline gains immediate access. Notice how the idea of later feels in the body. There is tension. Slight withdrawal. A leaning away from now. That sensation is not neutral. It reinforces the old structure where fulfillment is deferred. The higher timeline does not operate on deferral. It operates on immediacy. When you fully occupy now, something stabilizes. Not excitement. Not intensity. Groundedness. A sense that nothing needs to happen for this moment to be complete. That completeness is the signal. It tells the field that this baseline can be supported. Reality responds by organizing around it. You do not need to eliminate thoughts of the future. You need to stop living in them. Planning can exist without identification. Anticipation can arise without residence. The difference is subtle but decisive. When attention returns to now, coherence returns with it. This is why the higher timeline often feels slower at first. Slower than urgency. Slower than anticipation. It is not actually slow. It is stable. Stability feels unfamiliar to a system trained on acceleration. But stability is what allows a new reality to hold. Nothing needs to be completed before this can anchor. Nothing needs to be resolved. The only requirement is that you stop postponing your presence. The higher timeline is not waiting for your future self. It is responding to who you are being now. Contrast is not resistance. It is selection pressure. It is the mechanism through which timelines differentiate themselves and clarify which one you are aligning with. Without contrast, there would be no refinement. Everything would blur. The higher timeline would not be distinguishable from the old. Discomfort exists not to punish you, but to sharpen coherence. When a higher vibrational timeline begins stabilizing, anything incompatible with it becomes more noticeable. Old habits feel heavier. Certain conversations feel draining. Environments that once felt neutral now feel misaligned. This is not regression. It is precision increasing. Contrast reveals what cannot come with you, not because it is bad, but because it no longer fits. Discomfort is often interpreted as a signal to stop. In reality, it is a signal to notice. The sensation of friction arises where two timelines overlap and disagree. The old timeline pulls through familiarity. The higher timeline pulls through resonance. The tension between them creates contrast. That contrast is information. Avoidance delays stabilization. When discomfort is avoided, the old timeline retains leverage. When discomfort is faced without judgment, its message becomes clear quickly. The higher timeline does not require you to endure pain. It requires you to see incompatibility clearly. Once seen, separation happens naturally. This is why contrast sharpens alignment. It removes ambiguity. You no longer have to wonder what belongs. Your system tells you directly. Expansion feels obvious. Contraction feels obvious. The confusion only arises when contrast is resisted or explained away. When allowed, it does its job efficiently. Contrast is not something you generate. It arises automatically as frequency shifts. As your baseline changes, reality presents situations that reveal where coherence is incomplete. These situations are not obstacles. They are calibration points. They show you exactly where attention is still anchored to the old structure. The mistake is trying to eliminate contrast. That effort keeps both timelines active. The higher timeline integrates contrast by letting it be felt and understood without drama. There is no need to label the experience as negative or positive. It is neither. It is clarifying. As alignment sharpens, contrast becomes cleaner and shorter-lived. Discomfort passes faster. Decisions become simpler. You no longer need to analyze what feels right. The signal is immediate. This is not because life becomes easier, but because your system stops tolerating incoherence. The higher timeline does not grow through comfort alone. It grows through discernment. Contrast provides that discernment. It shows you where you are still negotiating with what no longer matches. Once that negotiation ends, the pressure dissolves. There is no need to brace against contrast. Bracing creates resistance, which prolongs the overlap. Allowing contrast to be felt without interpretation lets the system recalibrate quickly. The moment you stop fighting the sensation, it begins to resolve. This is why contrast often intensifies right before stabilization deepens. It is the final sorting. The last places where the old timeline tries to maintain relevance. When those points are seen clearly, without avoidance or attachment, the higher timeline gains dominance without effort. Contrast is not something to overcome. It is something to understand. And once understood, it no longer needs to repeat. Recognition is not a thought. It is not an insight you arrive at through analysis. It is a moment of internal alignment where something settles so completely that oscillation becomes unnecessary. Before recognition, attention moves back and forth between timelines. One feels familiar but heavy. The other feels lighter but uncertain. Effort exists in this phase because identity has not yet chosen a dominant baseline. Recognition is the tipping point where that movement stops. This moment is quiet. It does not announce itself. There is no surge of excitement or dramatic clarity. Instead, there is a subtle but unmistakable sense of finality. Not finality in an ending sense, but in a settling sense. The higher timeline is no longer something you return to. It becomes where you stand. Effort drops away at this point because effort was only needed to manage oscillation. When two timelines compete, the system tries to balance them. It evaluates. It corrects. It monitors. Recognition collapses the need for that management. One timeline becomes primary, not by force, but by obviousness. This is why recognition cannot be rushed. It does not occur because you want it to. It occurs when the higher timeline has proven itself stable enough to be lived without reference to the old one. The system stops checking back. The comparison ends. That ending is recognition. Once recognition happens, returning to the old timeline feels artificial. Not impossible, but unnatural. The emotional charge that once pulled you back is gone. Habits may still appear, but they no longer carry authority. They feel hollow. This is not resistance. It is incompatibility. Recognition is irreversible because it changes identity, not behavior. You do not convince yourself of a new truth. You become unable to unsee what has stabilized. The higher timeline does not feel better in an emotional sense. It feels truer. And truth does not require maintenance. At this stage, seeking falls away. Questions that once felt urgent lose relevance. Not because they were answered, but because they no longer apply. The system is no longer oriented toward improvement or escape. It is oriented toward continuity. Life becomes simpler, not easier, because fewer internal negotiations are happening. This is also where effort-based practices naturally dissolve. Not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer needed. Practices belong to transition phases. Recognition marks the end of transition. From here, the higher timeline stabilizes through ordinary living, not special attention. Recognition does not eliminate contrast or emotion. It changes your relationship to them. Contrast is no longer threatening. Emotion is no longer confusing. They are simply movements within a stable field. The field itself does not wobble. If you are wondering whether recognition has happened, that wondering itself is a sign that oscillation is still present. Recognition does not ask for confirmation. It is self-confirming. It feels like standing on solid ground after walking on shifting terrain. You do not need to analyze the ground to trust it. This moment cannot be forced because it is not achieved. It is allowed. It arrives when you stop trying to stabilize and realize that stabilization has already occurred. The higher timeline does not become dominant through effort. It becomes dominant through recognition. And once recognized, it no longer competes. It simply is. You do not move into a higher timeline the way you would move toward a destination. There is no distance to cross and no ascent to complete. Timelines are not places. They are states of identity. They organize themselves around who you are being, not where you are going. The idea of movement belongs to the old framework, where reality is external and you must reach it. The higher framework operates through becoming. Identity is not a label or a story. It is the dominant frequency you sustain without effort. It is the emotional and perceptual baseline that feels natural to you. That baseline functions like a transmitter. Whatever it broadcasts determines which version of reality can coherently assemble around you. You are not entering a higher timeline. You are transmitting the conditions that allow it to take form. This is why ascension language creates confusion. Ascension implies hierarchy, distance, and improvement. It suggests that you are here and something better is up there. That belief keeps identity oriented toward lack. The higher timeline does not require improvement. It requires congruence. When identity stabilizes, the corresponding timeline appears without effort. Reality is not something you travel through. It is something that organizes itself around coherence. When identity changes, reality follows. Not symbolically. Structurally. The same environment, the same life, the same circumstances begin to behave differently because the organizing principle has shifted. This is not magic. It is alignment. Becoming a higher timeline means that certain internal negotiations end. You no longer need to convince yourself to choose differently. Choices emerge from clarity rather than conflict. This is how you know identity has shifted. There is less internal debate. Less justification. Less resistance. The higher timeline feels natural because it matches who you are now being. This also explains why effort fades after recognition. Effort was only needed when identity was divided. When identity stabilizes, the signal becomes clean. A clean signal does not require amplification. It simply transmits. The higher timeline responds because it is the most compatible structure available. There is no need to leave anything behind intentionally. Old behaviors, relationships, and patterns dissolve when they no longer match the signal. This is not abandonment. It is reorganization. Identity does not reject the old timeline. It outgrows it through incompatibility. When you understand this, urgency drops away. There is nothing to reach. Nothing to achieve. Nothing to complete. The work was never about movement. It was about coherence. As coherence stabilizes, reality reorganizes automatically. This is also why comparison becomes irrelevant. You cannot compare timelines as destinations because each is accessed through identity. Another person's experience has no bearing on yours. Their signal is different. Their organization follows accordingly. Your only task is to remain congruent with what you have already recognized. Becoming the higher timeline does not mean life becomes perfect. It means life becomes aligned. Friction reduces where resistance once lived. Flow appears where effort once dominated. This is not because circumstances are controlled, but because identity is no longer fragmented. You are not progressing towards something better. You are stabilizing into what is already true for you. The higher timeline does not wait for you to arrive. It responds the moment you stop trying to go somewhere and allow yourself to be coherent where you are. This is the shift. Not movement, but embodiment. Not ascension, but alignment. When you become the signal, the timeline has no choice but to follow. Stabilization is not something you maintain through discipline. It is not a state you hold together with vigilance or effort. Stabilization occurs when identity recalibrates to a new baseline that no longer requires management. When identity shifts, behavior follows naturally. When behavior is forced without identity change, it collapses. This distinction matters because many people believe they are stabilizing when they are actually compensating. They monitor themselves. They correct their thoughts. They regulate their emotions with effort. That approach belongs to the old timeline, where coherence must be enforced. In a higher timeline, coherence is inherent. It does not need supervision. Identity recalibration means that what once required effort now feels natural. The emotional baseline changes first. Reactivity softens. Urgency loses its grip. Then perception follows. Situations are interpreted differently without conscious reframing. Finally, behavior reorganizes. Actions align without internal negotiation. This sequence is automatic when identity shifts. Discipline is only necessary when identity and behavior are misaligned. It acts as a bridge during transition, not as a foundation. Once stabilization occurs, discipline becomes unnecessary because there is no longer resistance to overcome. You do not discipline yourself to breathe. You do not discipline yourself to recognize what feels true. You simply do it. This is why attempts to stay in a higher timeline through control fail. Control assumes instability. It communicates distrust in the new baseline. That distrust introduces tension, which reactivates lower timelines. The higher timeline stabilizes when it is trusted enough to be lived without oversight. Identity recalibration is subtle. It does not announce itself with declarations or commitments. It shows up as a reduction in internal friction. Fewer arguments with yourself. Less justification. Less explanation. Decisions feel obvious, not because they are simple, but because the signal is clear. When identity coheres with the higher timeline, relapse becomes unlikely. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is unappealing. Old patterns lose their emotional reward. They no longer provide relief or familiarity. This is not suppression. It is incompatibility. The system simply stops reaching for what no longer resonates. This is also why guilt disappears. Guilt requires the belief that you should be different from who you are. When identity stabilizes, that belief dissolves. There is no longer a split between who you are and who you think you should be. Alignment replaces self-correction. Stabilization does not mean perfection. It means consistency. Emotional waves still occur. Challenges still arise. But they no longer threaten identity. They are processed within a stable field rather than destabilizing it. The higher timeline does not collapse under pressure because identity is no longer conditional. You may notice that external motivation decreases. This is often misinterpreted as loss of drive. In reality, it is loss of friction. Action still happens, but it arises from clarity instead of pressure. The system no longer needs to be pushed. It moves when movement is appropriate. This is the difference between maintaining a state and embodying one. Maintenance requires effort because the state is not yet integrated. Embodiment requires nothing because the state has become the baseline. The higher timeline stabilizes through embodiment, not enforcement. When identity recalibrates, you do not hold the timeline together. The timeline holds you. Reality organizes around the new baseline without negotiation. Stabilization is complete not when nothing changes, but when change no longer threatens coherence. That is how you know identity has shifted. Lower timelines do not fall away because you push them out. They dissolve because resonance ends. This distinction is essential, because force creates attachment, and attachment keeps timelines active. The higher timeline does not require rejection of the old. It renders it irrelevant. When identity recalibrates, what once felt necessary begins to feel heavy. Certain conversations lose momentum. Habits that once provided comfort stop delivering relief. Thought loops that once felt compelling begin to feel repetitive and hollow. This is not moral growth. It is structural change. The signal has shifted, and the old structures no longer have anything to lock onto. Disengagement is often misunderstood as avoidance or superiority. In truth, it is neither. It is simply the absence of charge. When resonance ends, effort is no longer required to maintain distance. Separation happens naturally, without explanation or conflict. This is why trying to consciously cut ties backfires. Cutting implies tension. Dissolving requires none. People may leave your life, or you may find yourself less available to certain dynamics. This is not abandonment. It is reorganization. The higher timeline does not punish connections. It recalibrates them. Some relationships evolve to meet the new frequency. Others fade because there is no longer a shared baseline. Neither outcome is wrong. Habits dissolve the same way. You do not need to break them. Breaking implies struggle. When the emotional payoff disappears, the habit collapses on its own. The higher timeline does not demand willpower. It removes the incentive for behaviors that no longer match identity. What remains is simplicity. Thought loops follow the same rule. They persist only when they are fed. When identity shifts, the emotional energy that sustained them withdraws. The thoughts may still arise, but they no longer spiral. They pass through without traction. This is not suppression. It is loss of relevance. There is no superiority in this process. Superiority belongs to comparison, and comparison belongs to fragmented identity. The higher timeline does not position itself above the old. It simply becomes incompatible with it. This prevents guilt, judgment, and nostalgia from pulling you backward. Nostalgia is often the last tether. It arises when the mind remembers emotional intensity without recognizing energetic cost. The higher timeline does not deny the past. It contextualizes it. What once felt meaningful is seen clearly for what it was, appropriate for who you were then, not for who you are now. This natural falling away can feel disorienting if it is unexpected. The absence of familiar friction can feel like emptiness at first. But that emptiness is space, not loss. Space is what allows the higher timeline to stabilize fully. Filling it too quickly with old patterns reactivates them. You do not need to announce these changes. You do not need to justify them. Explanation is another form of attachment. When resonance ends, silence is often the cleanest response. The system knows what it is doing. Lower timelines do not collapse all at once. They release layer by layer, in the order that identity shifts. What remains is not a void, but a cleaner field. Fewer obligations. Fewer compulsions. Less noise. This simplicity is not deprivation. It is alignment. Nothing is taken from you in this process. What falls away was already incompatible. What remains is what can actually be lived without resistance. The higher timeline does not ask you to let go. It makes holding on unnecessary. You were never outside the higher timeline. That is the realization that dissolves the last layer of seeking. There was no separation to overcome, no distance to close, no elevation to achieve. The higher timeline was never somewhere else. It was never waiting for you to arrive. It was always present, available the moment identity became quiet enough to recognize it. Ascension narratives suggest movement. They imply that you begin in one place and rise into another. That framework reinforces separation. It positions the higher timeline as distant and conditional. In truth, nothing moved. What changed was perception. What dissolved was interference. The higher timeline did not appear. It revealed itself when resistance dropped. This is why recognition feels like remembering rather than discovering. There is a subtle familiarity to it. A sense that something has come back online rather than something new being added. The nervous system relaxes not because it achieved something, but because it stopped pretending it was separate from what it already was. Separation was never real. It was functional. It allowed contrast, refinement, and identity formation. But once its purpose was fulfilled, it no longer needed to be maintained. The higher timeline does not eliminate separation by force. It renders it unnecessary through clarity. When you realize you were always inside it, effort loses meaning. Seeking collapses. The question changes from how do I get there to why was I ever trying to leave? This is not resignation. It is relief. The end of striving. The end of becoming. What remains is presence without agenda. The higher timeline does not feel elevated. It feels grounded. It does not feel extraordinary. It feels natural. This is how you know it is real. Fantasy excites. Truth settles. When the system recognizes truth, it stops scanning for alternatives. This realization does not invalidate your past experiences. It contextualizes them. The phases of seeking, effort, confusion, and overlap were not mistakes. They were part of the remembering process. Separation created the contrast necessary for recognition to occur. Once recognition happens, the contrast dissolves. There is no hierarchy here. No higher self watching from above. No lower self to transcend. Those distinctions belong to a fragmented model. In coherence, there is only identity expressing itself without distortion. The higher timeline is not superior. It is integrated. This is why nothing dramatic needs to happen now. No declaration. No commitment. No maintenance. The remembering is complete when it feels obvious. When you stop asking whether you are aligned and start noticing that alignment no longer feels like a concept. Life continues. Challenges still arise. Emotions still move. But they no longer threaten belonging. You are not trying to stay inside the higher timeline because you realize you never left it. What once felt like access now feels like home. The mind may still reach for narratives of progress or loss. That is normal. Old habits echo after identity shifts. But those narratives no longer carry authority. They are seen as remnants of a framework that has completed its function. You were not traveling upward. You were turning inward. Not inward as introspection, but inward as coherence. As the place where nothing is missing and nothing is sought. This is not the end of a journey. It is the end of the illusion that there was one. The higher timeline is not something you hold on to. It is what remains when you stop holding yourself apart. This is remembrance. And once remembered, it does not need to be protected. It simply continues, because it always has. The higher timeline does not stabilize through monitoring. Monitoring implies fragility. It suggests that alignment is something that can be lost if attention slips. That belief alone introduces tension, and tension destabilizes coherence. The higher timeline stabilizes through living, not watching yourself live. Vigilance belongs to transition phases. It appears when identity is still recalibrating and the system does not yet trust the new baseline. During that phase, attention keeps checking: am I still aligned? Am I doing this right? Did I fall back? But once identity has cohered, vigilance becomes unnecessary. And when it lingers past its usefulness, it becomes interference. The higher timeline is not maintained by awareness of it. It is maintained by embodiment. Embodiment means you allow life to move through you without constant correction. You engage with ordinary moments without asking what they mean. You respond without narrating the response. This ordinariness is not a downgrade. It is the sign that stabilization has completed. Monitoring creates a split. One part of you lives, another part observes and evaluates. That split reintroduces the structure of separation the higher timeline has already dissolved. When you stop monitoring, the split closes. Experience becomes whole again. That wholeness is coherence. Fear of losing the state is the final echo of the old timeline. It assumes that alignment is conditional and temporary. In truth, what has stabilized cannot be lost, because it is no longer a state. It is the baseline. You do not fear losing your sense of self when you stop thinking about it. You do not lose balance when you stop checking if you are balanced. Stability is proven by its ability to be unattended. Ordinary presence is the interface through which the higher timeline continues. Washing dishes. Having conversations. Making decisions. Feeling emotions. None of these activities disrupt coherence when identity is aligned. In fact, they strengthen it. The higher timeline is not sustained in stillness alone. It is sustained in participation without resistance. This is why attempts to protect the state backfire. Protection implies threat. Threat activates vigilance. Vigilance tightens the system. Tightening lowers compatibility. The higher timeline does not need protection. It needs permission to be lived fully, without being treated as fragile. You may notice moments where attention drifts, emotions surge, or old patterns briefly appear. These are not signs of loss. They are movements within a stable field. Stability does not mean nothing moves. It means movement no longer collapses the field itself. Waves occur, but the ocean remains. When you stop monitoring, something surprising happens. Coherence deepens. Not because you tried harder, but because you removed the last layer of control. The system relaxes into itself. Life feels less performative. More direct. Less filtered. This simplicity is not complacency. It is integration. The higher timeline is lived the same way any truth is lived. Naturally. Without effort. Without constant reference. When you forget about it, it does not disappear. It operates more cleanly, because nothing is interfering. There is nothing to fall back into. There is no lower state waiting to reclaim you. Those fears belong to a framework that assumes separation. In coherence, there is only continuity. You live your life, and the higher timeline expresses itself through that living, quietly and reliably. Stabilization completes when you trust life enough to stop watching yourself exist. This timeline does not depend on the video. The video did not create it. It did not activate something that can switch off when the sound ends. What happened here was recognition, not transmission. Recognition does not reverse itself. Once a higher timeline stabilizes, it continues because it is no longer being held in place by attention or effort. Nothing is required of you after this moment. There is no practice to keep up, no state to protect, no insight to remember. The higher timeline does not persist through memory. It persists through identity. An identity has already shifted. What you are now compatible with continues to organize itself without supervision. It is important to understand this clearly, because dependency is the final distortion. Dependency suggests that coherence comes from outside you. That something external must remain present for alignment to last. That belief belongs to the old timeline. The higher timeline stabilizes because it is now the most natural configuration available to you. As this video ends, life resumes. Conversations, tasks, challenges, ordinary moments. None of these interrupt the process. They are the process. The higher timeline does not exist apart from your life. It expresses itself through it. In how you respond. In what you no longer react to. In what feels unnecessary to explain or control. You may notice subtle confirmations in the coming days. Not signs meant to convince you, but absences. Less internal noise. Less urgency to define yourself. Less pull toward what once consumed attention. These are not achievements. They are side effects of stabilization. Do not look for proof. Proof invites comparison, and comparison invites oscillation. Trust is not belief here. Trust is non-interference. Let life unfold without checking whether you are still aligned. Alignment does not disappear when unobserved. It deepens. There may be moments when the mind tries to return to old frameworks. That is normal. Habit echoes do not mean regression. They mean completion is settling in layers. Each time you notice without engaging, the echo fades more quickly. The higher timeline does not require perfection. It requires honesty. This continuity does not make you special. It makes you coherent. Coherence is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It is known by how little effort life requires when resistance drops. You are not stepping into something extraordinary. You are stepping out of unnecessary struggle. Nothing needs to be concluded here. No final realization needs to land. The arc does not close because it was never a journey. It was a remembering. And remembrance does not end. It integrates. Let the video end. Let the sound fade. Let the mind rest. What has stabilized will remain because it is no longer being held in place by attention. It is being lived. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.